Hey guys, tonight we sink into the soggy soil of the medieval countryside. Not exactly a thrilling battlefield or royal court, but a place far more familiar to the average peasant. The garden. You kneel in the dirt, mud squishing under your knees, fingernails caked with earth as you pull up what looks like a swollen white root. It's a turnip. Again. Always the turnips. You'd rather eat tree bark. But here, in the year 1294, this humble vegetable is more than just your next meal. It's your tax. You see, back then, the concept of money was a bit fluid. Most people didn't have coins jangling in their pockets. What they did have was turnips. Lots of them. Enough to fill a cart and trundle it over to the manor as part of the feudal obligation. You didn't just pay taxes in silver, you paid in produce. And turnips, bless their blandness, were dependable. They grew in awful soil, ignored frost like it was a joke, and kept for ages without rotting into a squishy mess. You, dear peasant, were probably grateful for that, until the 5th consecutive turnip stew this week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, while we dig into history's forgotten vegetables, comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You haul your harvest toward the manor, the cart groaning, turnips rolling with every bump. You're paying your lord not just in vegetables, but in days of labor too. It's called boon work. And when harvest time hits, you're summoned like a surf Avengers team. And what do you get in return? Maybe a thin soup and the right to farm the same miserable patch next year. And here's the kicker. Turnips weren't even the worst option. At least they were edible. Some taxes came due in flax fiber, dried fish, or, in more obscure cases, live eels. Yes, eels. Imagine the tax collector showing up with a bucket and a blank stare. Turnips also doubled as livestock feed and emergency famine food, which really says it all. There are records of entire medieval communities surviving hard winters on little more than these humble roots. Charred turnips were a thing, possibly by accident, possibly because even the cook was tired of them. What makes the turnip such an emblem of forgotten vegetable glory is not its taste. Let's be honest, it tastes like if disappointment were a root, but its resilience. There's something noble in that. Historians still argue whether the medieval turnip we picture was the same as our modern supermarket variety, or some tougher, spicier cousin. The seeds traded across Europe varied by region, and descriptions from the time are, let's say, inconsistent. One account describes them as fat and watery, with less sting than a radish and more heft than a yam, which could describe almost anything. We also know turnips featured in feasts, not center stage, mind you, but boiled, buttered, mashed into puddings, and in one surviving recipe, layered into a kind of proto-lasagna with cheese and stale bread. It wasn't good, but it was filling. Quirkier still, turnips were sometimes weaponized in village disputes. There's a record from 1312 where a tavern brawl escalated when someone hurled a roasted turnip and struck the reeve's son. Apparently, the turnip had been seasoned with mustard, a salt and flavor. In folk magic, turnips could be carved into protective charms, or even lanterns, centuries before the pumpkin stole the show. That's right, medieval Halloween wasn't glowing orange. It was lumpy white and slightly slimy. Just imagine walking down a foggy village path, clutching a turnip with a crude grimace carved into it and a flickering tallow candle inside. Not spooky so much as tragic. And yet, in all this, you, humble peasant, persist. You keep growing them, keep trading them, keep feeding them to your oxen, your children, your ungrateful in-laws. You know the soil, and the soil knows you. And the turnip? The turnip loves the soil. It thrives in the places no self-respecting lettuce would dare root. You wake before sunrise, your breath puffing in the chill air, You carry a wicker basket, each step muddy with last night's rain. The turnip patch is lumpy and sad, but you kneel anyway, hands already numb. Pull, shake, toss, over and over. This is your wealth, your rent, your dinner, your legacy. Modern grocery stores have mostly exiled the turnip to the back shelves, next to the sad leeks and forgotten rutabagas. But once it ruled empires, well, serfdoms, but that's close enough. Maybe, just maybe, it's time to invite it back to the table. Not for a starring role, but a cameo at least. You close your eyes now, still sitting in that muddy field, a basket of roots at your side. The manor bell rings somewhere in the distance, signaling the start of your workday. But you don't get up. Not just yet. You shift your weight on the splintery bench inside your drafty, peat-smelling cottage and reach for what looks like a tangled knot of pale white roots bundled together like someone braided spaghetti and forgot about it. You break one off. It snaps wetly. Sweet, fibrous, almost woody. This is skirret, and if you squint hard enough, it's dessert. Not familiar? Daunty worry? Most people haven't heard of skirret unless they've been on a suspiciously specific gardening blog or lost in a 15th century monastery cookbook. But for a good chunk of medieval history, especially in the British Isles and parts of Northern Europe, skirret was the sugar stick of the peasant table. Peel it, roast it, mash it, however you cook it, it surprises you. It's like if a parsnip and a marshmallow had a love child. Skirret, or Siam Cicerum if you want to sound clever at your next medieval-themed dinner party, was beloved by monks, housewives, and kings alike. It was praised in herbals for being exceedingly sweet, very nourishing, and, this one's a direct quote, helpful to those whose bellies be weak and fluxy. A gentle reminder that medieval medicine didn't shy away from discussing your digestive adventures. And here's the royal twist. Skirret was a favorite of King Charles the Great. Yes, Charlemagne himself, who supposedly ordered it planted in imperial gardens. Picture a royal gardener in the year 805 muttering about root spacing, while a Frankish noble insists, "The emperor demands more skirret by next Tuesday." There's power in that root. Historians still argue whether skirret was cultivated primarily for flavor or for its supposed medicinal virtues. Did medieval cooks crave the sweetness, or did they just want to stop fluxy problems in their tracks? The record is blurry. Some sources suggest it was boiled in wine and eaten as a tonic. Others describe it layered into pasties with honey and chopped dates, which either sounds delightful or like an Elizabethan energy bar. The plant itself is fussy. Skirret likes damp soil and partial sun. It grows in bunches, sending out a spaghetti fountain of white, stringy roots that break annoyingly if you pull them too hard. Medieval farmers knew this and adjusted accordingly. Some wrapped the roots in cloth to keep them from breaking, a kind of primitive food swaddling. Others soaked them overnight to soften the stringy texture. None of this made harvesting fun. You, lucky peasant, are now expected to gather a few pounds of this botanical hairball before midday. Better get digging. And yet, when done right, skirret was considered a luxury root. The flavor was subtle, like parsnip, but gentler, sweeter than carrot but without the crunch. If you roast it in butter, it caramelizes at the edges. You can mash it, fry it, boil it in milk with cinnamon, a recipe from a 14th century noble's kitchen, or bake it into pies. There's even one off-the-wall use from a Swiss abbey kitchen where skirret was sliced thin, dried, then rehydrated in mead before being candied. This recipe probably killed someone. Deliciously. Your hands ache from harvesting. Skirret is not cooperative. You grumble, mouthful of last year's dried apple, and wonder why the Lord as Steward insists this root must be on the manor as spring feast table. Rumor is it's for his cousin's wedding. You roll your eyes. Skirret, the wedding root. How romantic. Here's a quirk. Skirret was sometimes used to flavor beer. Yes, beer. It was tossed into the brew kettle with herbs and barley to give a sweet undertone. Did it work? No one really knows. But if you've ever had a seasonal craft ale with suspicious earthy notes, you've probably had a spiritual encounter with Skirt. And don't forget the smell. When fresh, Skirt gives off a slightly floral, earthy scent, like chamomile and damp socks. In the village, that smell meant harvest. Children would run down the hill barefoot, racing to grab the best roots before the grown-ups got them all. Occasionally, they'd eat them raw, teeth squeaking on stringy root. One poor soul broke a molar. Still, you marvel at its resilience. Skirt never went truly wild, but it's been lurking in herb gardens for centuries, waiting, watching, ready to crawl its way back into trendy farm-to-table menus. It's just waiting for one ironic food blogger to declare it the new carrot. Oddly enough, Skirt wasn't often pickled. This might be due to its high sugar content. It didn't keep well that way, but it was frequently dried and stored in clay pots wrapped in cloth, a kind of ancient Tupperware situation. You imagine a 14th century monk carefully tucking his Skirt stash under a wooden bench, whispering, "No one touch this. It's for Lent." In some rural areas, children played Skirt harvesting games, not unlike bobbing for apples, but more rooted, literally. One strange record describes a feast where guests were blindfolded and had to guess the vegetable in their bowl, based solely on smell and touch. Apparently, Skirt stumped everyone. You stretch your back. The sun is low now. You've got enough Skirt to fill the sack, and your knees are coated in damp earth. You sling the sack over your shoulder, feel the roots shift and tangle behind you. You'll clean them later, probably by lantern light, swatting at moths and muttering about your aching spine. There's something satisfying about it, though. Growing your own sweets. No need for a spice merchant's scandalously priced sack of cane sugar from Alexandria. You've got roots. And maybe, just maybe, you prefer them. You push aside the frost-bitten mulch near the edge of the forest, the rich, peaty soil giving off that unmistakable smell of damp leaves and old rain. Nestled beneath the brambles is your prize. Ramps. Not a medieval siege weapon despite the name. No, ramps are wild leeks. And in the early spring, when the rest of the world is still brown and shivering, they erupt in sharp green clusters like nature's way of saying, "Yes, your winter stew was a crime against seasoning." You snap a handful free, and immediately your fingers reek. Onions, garlic, something aggressively herbal. These things are tiny but potent. If your breath doesn't knock over a candle tonight, you're doing it wrong. Ramps were among the first green edibles to break through the soil each spring. In an age before refrigeration and imports, this meant everything. You've spent months eating grains, dried peas, and anything vaguely root-shaped. Suddenly, the woods offer you something alive. Spicy, green. You could weep. You probably do. That's not unusual. Ramp foraging was practically a religious experience after a long medieval winter. They weren't cultivated, not really. Ramps grew wild in damp, shady woodlands. Monks wrote about them in herbals, calling them wild garlic, and praising their humorous heat, which had nothing to do with comedy and everything to do with balancing your bodily fluids. Remember, medieval medicine was basically astrology for your intestines. And yet, for all their fiery reputation, ramps had a gentle side. Cooked slowly, they mellowed. Tossed into pottage or folded into oat cakes, they brought a round, buttery sharpness. Some cooks even pickled them in ale vinegar and served them alongside meat pies, creating a strange but effective kind of forest chutney. Historians still argue whether ramps were primarily medicinal or culinary. Were they added to spring dishes to kickstart digestion, or were they an early attempt at flavor elevation? Some evidence suggests both. In one 14th century herbal, ramps are described as a cleanser of the bile and a friend to digestion, but not suitable for courtship. Fair. There's also a long-forgotten superstition that eating too many ramps would make you quarrelsome and red in the face. You can almost picture a medieval tavern brawl starting with, "He smelled of ramps and insulted my goat." In the wilder corners of Europe, Wales, Scotland, Bavaria, ramps were gathered in secret, not because they were illegal, but because they were coveted. A particularly ramp-rich grove could become a closely guarded family secret, passed down with more reverence than Grandma's oatcake recipe. Children were sworn to silence. Tell no one of the ramp hollow, they were warned, not even your betrothed. There are even records of local lords levying small fines on peasants who foraged ramps from their forests without permission. Imagine being hauled before the reeve, pockets full of contraband allium, trying to look innocent while your breath betrays you. And then there were the ramp festivals. Oh yes, some villages celebrated the return of ramps like a leafy Mardi Gras. People cooked them in great iron pots, shared flatbreads, and likely engaged in questionable dances. Ramps were woven into garlands. There was one alarming tradition in Transylvania where young men competed to see who could eat the most raw ramps in a single sitting. The winner got a kiss. The loser got indigestion and social exile. In your village, ramps are dried and stored carefully, tied in bundles and hung from beams, where they sway slightly in the breeze like aromatic ghosts. By autumn, their scent fades, but early spring brings it back with a vengeance. And every time, you rejoice. Because ramps mean survival. They mean freshness. They mean you made it through another winter. One particularly quirky remedy involves ramp poultices applied to the feet, to draw out chill and humors. There's no scientific backing for this, obviously, but if you've been stomping around in soggy wool boots for 6 months, even a spicy onion foot wrap starts to sound reasonable. You carry your bundle home through a misty glade, dodging thorns and whispering to yourself the tally. 7 bunches, clean roots, early shoots. You'll roast some tonight over coals, crush a few into a paste with dried mustard seeds, and tuck the rest into a clay pot with salt and fat. That'll keep until next week, if no one raids your cupboard. Modern chefs have rediscovered ramps in recent years, and suddenly they're everywhere. Microgreens on sourdough toast, infused into butter, piled artfully on top of risottos that cost as much as a medieval ox. But here, now, you're not chasing trends. You're just trying to stay fed. You kneel beside the fire and rub the mud off each stalk, careful not to bruise the leaves. Your fingers tingle from the oils. Your mouth waters a little, and you catch yourself smiling. It's the first green thing you've seen since October. The ramp is back, you're back, and soon the world will be too. The barley's not up yet, and the sheep have that look, half bored, half judgmental. But in the corner of the garden, half forgotten under last year's nettles, grows a stubborn little green cluster. You brush away the weeds. Good King Henry. Not a man, not a monarch. A plant. A plant so defiant in name, it might as well come with a tiny scepter. You pinch a leaf between your fingers. It's thick, like spinach with ambitions. Slightly bitter. Earthy. If you squint, it tastes like survival. This story was inspired by The Channel. It's a channel about medieval life presented by a historian. In today's episode, we talk about one of the most popular plants in medieval gardens. This is Good King Henry. Welcome to my channel. Chenopodium bonus henricus, as your village priest's herbal manuscript insists on calling it, was one of the go-to greens of the medieval poor. It didn't need pampering, didn't mind bad soil, came back year after year whether you wanted it or not. The peasants called it poor man's asparagus, which is both endearing and deeply misleading. It tasted absolutely nothing like asparagus. But hey, you had to market it somehow. Good King Henry was technically a perennial potherb. That's right, potherb. As in, tossed into pots, boiled within an inch of its life, and served in every stew, soup, and sludgy concoction you dared call dinner. In the hungry gap, the bleak weeks between winter year's end and the spring harvest, it might be been your only green thing. And you learned to love it, or at least to tolerate it with aggressive seasoning. Historians still argue whether Good King Henry was originally cultivated or simply tolerated. Some say it was deliberately sown in cottage gardens beside the onions and leeks. Others argue it just sort of appeared, like that one cousin who never leaves, and peasants figured it was edible enough to avoid uprooting. You, of course, don't mind. You boil the leaves first to soften their edge, toss them into barley pottage, maybe smear a bit of pig fat in the pan if you're lucky. The young shoots, when they first emerge, do resemble asparagus. Tall, green, mildly juicy if you squish them, but only in the same way your wooden spoon resembles a roast chicken. Monks at Benedictine abbeys were particularly fond of this plant, not because of flavor, but because it symbolized humility. It grew unasked, unruly, feeding the poor without complaint. One 13th-century abbot supposedly banned it from the high table, declaring it too common for cloistered bellies. Naturally, the kitchen friars roasted it with herbs and served it anyway. The name is a puzzle. Good King Henry. Historians can't agree if it refers to King Henry IV, a folk hero to some medieval peasants, or a mythical woodland sprite named Heinrich who protected fields. There's even a bizarre Welsh ballad where Good King Henry is portrayed as a green man who feeds starving children and turns into a vegetable each spring. Yes, you heard that right. The medieval brain was a garden of wonders. One oddly specific tradition held that if you planted Good King Henry on a full moon while singing a psalm, it would never die. Another claimed eating it on Easter Sunday would make your hair grow faster. Neither claim is backed by modern botany, but you'd be surprised how many bald men mumbled hymns to their salad. The plant wasn't just for leaves either. Its seeds were ground into a coarse meal and added to bread, though the results were often dense enough to double as paving stones. But again, calories were king, and if your bread clunked when you dropped it, at least you knew it was full of something. Good King Henry was also used medicinally, of course. A poultice of its leaves was said to draw out poison from bites and stings. More questionably, some midwives applied crushed leaves to the bellies of colicky infants. And there's one alarming tale from a Saxon apothecary who used it as a suppository. Details are scarce, probably for the best. You reach for your knife and trim a few more stalks, bunching them with twine made from flax threads. The leaves squeak as they fold. There's satisfaction in this, gathering something your ancestors gathered, in the same light, the same soil. You imagine a long-ago peasant kneeling just like you, humming tunelessly, knowing that tonight's meal might taste green instead of brown. Nearby, a neighbor calls out, "Stewing your Henry again?" You grunt back. It's a village joke by now. Good King Henry, savior of poor soups, prince of boiled things. Everyone grows it, no one brags about it, but they'd miss it if it were gone. Modern cooks have forgotten it entirely. You won't find it in stores, though a few culinary rebels are sneaking it back into gardens and farm stands. High-end chefs are eyeing its leaves like it's the next kale. But you know better. It's not trendy, it's not glamorous, it's reliable. The friend who always shows up, even when you forgot you invited them. By late evening, you've filled your basket. It smells like wet spinach and stubbornness. You smile. There will be stew tonight, or maybe fried leaves with rye bread and mustard. Nothing fancy, nothing worth writing poems about, but good, honest food. A meal your ancestors might nod at in approval. And as the firelight flickers on your stone wall, you whisper thanks, not to the king, but to the plant that wears his name and asks for nothing in return. And thank you for watching. Hey, everyone, I'm here. This is my co-host. And as we wait for the medieval world to wake up, let's talk about our video topics for the week. Our community is amazing. When we asked you all what you wanted to see on the channel, you delivered some excellent ideas. So let's get to it. First up, a viewer asked us to explain why some people believed medieval life was actually better than modern life. Well, I put together an answer that includes everything from dirty water to deadly nightshade. It's fascinating. Next, one of our viewers suggested we discuss legendary female warriors of the medieval world. And, let me tell you, you haven't seen badass until you've seen the shield maidens riding into battle. I am sure you'll recognize some of these names. Our third video this week is all about holy relics in the Middle Ages. We're talking mummies and miracles, the tooth of St. Nicholas and the blood of Christ himself. Join us for a wild ride through the history of believing in bones. Oh, and finally, we're doing a listener mailbag this week, answering questions sent in by members. Our community is incredible, and I cannot wait for you all to see what we got. And don't forget, our new membership tier is live now. You can become a monthly or yearly member at the link below. It's a great way to support our work. Plus, you get access to weekly podcast, blooper reels, and our private server. I mean, look at this guy. He's on our server, and he likes it. Join us. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to leave your feedback below. Thanks for joining us, and happy questing. The sun climbs higher now, nudging warmth into the garden rows, and your hands reach for something almost too delicate to trust. Skirret. You remember where you planted it, though it's easy to lose among weeds and nettles. Thin, feathery stalks like a half-formed carrot top with commitment issues. You kneel, pull gently, and up comes a strange little clutch of pale, finger-thick roots. One looks like a witch's gnarled toe. Lovely. Skirret was the sweet root of the medieval world. Sugar? Ha. Try again. Unless you were rich enough to own a spice cabinet, and if you were, why are you still eating pondweed soup? You got your sweetness from nature's underground surprises, and skirret, with its crisp, clean, faintly sugary bite, was a quiet hero of the garden. It belongs to the same botanical family as carrots, parsley, and poison hemlock. Try not to mix those up. You wash it carefully in the rain barrel, scrubbing off dirt, revealing a ghostly bundle of cream-colored tendrils. When fresh, it snaps like celery. When cooked, it turns tender, almost buttery. Medieval cooks sliced it into stews, roasted it in ashes, or mashed it with cream and breadcrumbs until it resembled a custard that had lost its sense of purpose. In royal courts, skirret earned a moment of fame. Charlemagne reportedly ordered it grown in his imperial gardens. The Capetians had entire plots devoted to it. But unlike, say, peacocks or imported almonds, skirret didn't show off well. It was too humble, too odd. The nobility eventually lost interest. Peasants, on the other hand, never let it go. Historians still argue whether skirret was native to Europe or introduced from the East. Its sudden popularity around the 9th century suggests trade routes might be carried it westward, possibly alongside stranger things like glass beads, dried figs, and news of Viking raids. Taste-wise, it's like a sugary parsnip that forgot to grow bitter. Some records describe it as the root which pleaseth children, which in a world where kids gnawed on boiled cabbage and tree bark sounds like a ringing endorsement. A few eccentric monks wrote skirret into their herbals, praising its sweet and warming humor. One even claimed it cured melancholia of the stomach, a condition I can only assume meant, I am sad and have gas. Others boiled it with milk to ease coughs or blended it into early tooth powders. Yes, people once brushed their teeth with sweet root dust. No, it didn't work. You bite off a sliver, raw. It's crisp, a little nutty, like a white carrot that got invited to the dessert table. Your teeth sink in easily, and you think, briefly, of how satisfying it must have been in winter, a texture that snaps when everything else is mush. In some corners of medieval Europe, skirret was served fried in lard and considered a delicacy. Recipes in 15th century manuscripts refer to skirrets with saute and crème. One enthusiastic cook described them as joyful to the mouth and not off-putting to the belly, which is basically a Michelin star in Middle English. Of course, not everything went smoothly. The roots were tricky to clean. They forked and tangled like stubborn shoelaces, often hiding grit in their crevices. One chronicler notes a feast where the white roots were found most pleasant, save for the gravel that did crunch. Charming. There's a tiny folk tale from Cornwall about a skirret that grew so large it trapped a family inside their own cottage. It's nonsense, but adorable nonsense. Another, from the Black Forest, claims that witches planted skirret in graveyards to sweeten the dead. Again, Zero evidence, but a great image for your dreams tonight. You finish harvesting your row. It's a good yield, enough for a side dish at least. Maybe you'll bake them into a pie with goat cheese and dried apples. Maybe you'll just roast them with salt and eat every last one while staring into the fire like a sugar-deprived medieval goblin. No judgment. What's strange is how skirret faded. It lingered until the 18th century, then vanished. No scandal. No famine. Just quietly replaced by carrots, by parsnips, by the growing obsession with refined foods. It was too knobby, too unpredictable, too much like food that came from dirt. But now, here it is again, in your hands, sweet, scrappy, slightly lumpy, and entirely worth remembering. The fire crackles as you toss a cleaned root onto a skillet. It hisses and browns, filling the room with a smell that's half maple, half memory. For a second you understand the monks, the cooks, the farmers who once thought skirret was a treasure. Maybe they were right. You pop the slice into your mouth and grin. Who needs sugar when your vegetables know how to flirt? The breeze shifts, and you follow it through a patch of earth that doesn't look like much, just a low mess of broad, soft leaves, wrinkled like old parchment. You crouch, pull one gently, and take a sniff. It's faint, like cucumber, with a bitter edge. This, my sleep-deprived friend, is salsify, or, as medieval cooks like to call it, the oyster plant. Despite the alarming lack of shellfish involved. You won't find it at your local supermarket today, but in the medieval garden, salsify was a staple. A quiet, dependable root. Long, thin, sometimes purple-skinned with a snowy white interior that turned creamy when cooked. When fresh, they said it smelled like oysters. When boiled, it tasted faintly of artichoke and butter. When overcooked, well, let's just say no one wrote poems about that. Salsify was beloved precisely because it didn't try too hard. No spicy drama like mustard greens. No aristocratic flair like truffles. Just a root that showed up, softened in a pot, and did its job with quiet grace. You pry one loose from the soil. It clings slightly. Salsify roots run deep, as if they've been hiding from attention for centuries. Long, finger-thick, and slightly fuzzy near the tip, the root isn't flashy. But once you slice through that barky exterior, you see the pearly center. It's like a secret handshake from the past. Historians still argue whether salsify's oyster flavor was real or a symptom of medieval desperation. Was it genuinely seafood-ish? Or did monks just wish it tasted like oysters while chewing their root soup in a snow-covered cloister? The debate rages on politely. We do know salsify grew in many medieval monastic gardens, prized not just for its food value but its supposed medicinal gifts. It was used to stimulate the humors, especially the phlegmatic ones. If you've ever felt emotionally soggy, that's the one. And one German herbal claims it clarifies the skin and lightens the eyes. Sure it does. There's a 14th century French poem in which a lovesick knight sends his beloved a bouquet of salsify leaves, claiming they symbolize humble devotion with creamy root. She does not write back. In England, salsify earned the affectionate nickname goat's beard, thanks to the dramatic tufts of seeds it sends skyward in late summer. If you've ever seen a dandelion puffball on steroids, that's the look. Kids made wishes on them just like with dandelions, except with more ambition. One superstition said if you blew all the seeds off in one breath, your true love would dream of you that night. Unless, of course, the goats ate the plant first. In the kitchen, salsify was something of a chameleon. Boil it and mash it with butter. Creamy side dish. Slice it thin, dip in egg, fry in goose fat. Congratulations, you've invented medieval fries. Stew it slowly with leeks and ale. Now you've got peasant comfort food worthy of a song, albeit one sung off-key by someone with a leek stuck in their teeth. It was also one of the few vegetables that could pretend to be a luxury. A dish called mock oyster pie shows up in Tudor records with boiled salsify standing in for seafood, seasoned with mace and vinegar. Not quite the real thing, But if you'd never tasted an oyster, who were you to judge? You reach for your basket and add a few more roots, noticing how the soil clings to the ridges, refusing to let go. It's a vegetable that seems to remember the dirt it came from, like it is proud of it. You respect that. And then there's the flower. Ah yes, the bloom of the salsify. Delicate, lavender pink, almost like a daisy that wandered too far into the realm of poetry. It opens in the morning and closes by noon, like a shy librarian. Medieval herbalists considered this a sign of purity. One Italian friar wrote that the flower was too modest to gaze upon the wicked world for long. Bit dramatic, but it's a mood. Still, not everything about salsify was praised. It had a reputation for causing wind. In polite terms, flatulence. One 13th century cookbook warns cooks to serve sparingly to guests of prideful nature, lest their airs offend heaven. Excellent advice. So why did it vanish? Like many forgotten vegetables, salsify slowly lost the popularity contest. It took too long to grow. It wasn't uniform in shape. It didn't shine on a plate like a gleaming carrot or crispy potato. By the 19th century, chefs wanted showy vegetables. Salsify, humble and sincere, was quietly ushered out. But you've brought it back. Your little patch of resurrected roots is thriving. Tonight, you'll simmer a few in goat's milk and bay leaves, maybe add a crumble of cheese. The smell will be soft and warm, like something halfway between stew and sea breeze. And as the fire flickers and the wind hums low outside your door, you'll taste that creamy bite and remember that even the quietest vegetables once ruled the medieval table. Maybe they still should. You step carefully past the rough stones edging the garden path and move toward a tall, unruly cluster of plants that look like parsley trying to start a revolution. Thick, hollow stems, leaves like jagged lace, a scent that hits you the moment you brush past, a sharp, almost medicinal tang that immediately makes you question whether you be just picked dinner or a dangerous dare. Welcome to Alexander's. A name that sounds like a Roman senator, and fittingly so, because this plant marched in with the Romans and never quite left. You pluck a stalk and give it a tentative sniff. It's a lot, not unpleasant, but assertive. A bit like celery with a superiority complex. Medieval folks called it Alexander's alicost, or, my favorite, horse parsley, which feels vaguely insulting but also accurate. Alexanders were everywhere in the Middle Ages, especially near monasteries, coastal villages, and castle kitchens. Not because they were tasty in any traditional sense, let's be honest, they're a bit much raw, but because they grew where nothing else dared. Sandy soil, shade, salty breezes. Alexander said, "I thrive on neglect." And so they did. The entire plant was edible. Leaves, stems, seeds, roots, all fair game. You could boil the young shoots and pretend they were asparagus. The seeds worked like black pepper if you were too poor or too inland to afford the real stuff. And the roots, when roasted, became vaguely carrot-adjacent. Not carrot good, mind you, just carrot-ish. Historians still argue whether Alexanders were ever actually loved or simply endured. They appear in countless medieval recipes but are almost always paired with strong flavors: vinegar, garlic, anchovy paste. That's a sign. When your ingredient requires camouflage, it's probably not winning anyone's heart. But monks were obsessed with it. In cloistered herbals, Alexanders were praised as a warming green and a cleanser of the inward man, which is a medieval way of saying it'll keep your digestive tract on its toes. One particularly optimistic friar wrote that Alexanders, when steeped in wine, could prevent pestilence and improve the humor of the spleen. Strong claim, Brother Giles. The Roman roots of Alexanders are well documented. The plant's Latin name, Smyrnium olusatrum, sounds like a spell gone wrong. It was likely brought to Britain by Roman soldiers or herbalists who wanted something dependable in their campaign gardens. The Romans used it extensively, as a salad green, a medicine, and occasionally as a battlefield poultice. Nothing says conquest like slapping bitter parsley on a spear wound. You slice a stem and chew. It's crunchy, a little salty with a bitter kick that stings the back of your throat. Not terrible. Not great, but it tastes old, in the best way. Like history, whispering through your teeth. A few fringe accounts from the 12th century claimed that Alexanders were used in love potions. The leaves were supposedly crushed and steeped with honey and hawthorn. The result, according to a Welsh folk tale, caused fits of longing and increased wind. Romance was different back then. There's even a strange superstition that planting Alexanders near your doorway would keep away tax collectors. No one knows why. Probably invented by someone who really hated paying tithes. By the 17th century, Alexanders began their slow fade. The rise of celery, more delicate, less aggressive, and easier to cultivate in neat rows, pushed the older plant out of the garden spotlight. Cooks began to view it as a weed. Herbalists moved on, and so it slipped into obscurity, clinging to cliffs and coastal ruins like an herb-shaped ghost. You, though, are a bit of a time traveler, and here in your kitchen, you simmer chopped Alexanders with leeks and lentils, stirring slowly as the scent lifts into the rafters. It smells like spring in a monastery. Clean, earthy, a little stubborn. Maybe tonight you'll try an old recipe from a 14th century cookbook. Green steak of Alexandra stewed with cream and wine. The instructions end with, serve unto lord or beast as needed. It's good to have options. Modern chefs are just beginning to rediscover Alexanders. Foragers whisper about it in blogs. Gardeners eye it with cautious curiosity. But you're already ahead of the curve, slicing your medieval celery with the confidence of someone who doesn't mind a bit of botanical bite. You finish your pot of stew and ladle some into a chipped bowl. The texture is smooth, the flavor deep and herbal. Not sweet, not rich, but true. You imagine a nun, centuries ago, eating the same meal beside a flickering candle, grateful for something green in a gray season. As you take your first bite, a sheep outside coughs. You chew thoughtfully. Could it use more salt? Probably. Does it taste like something ancient and unyielding? Absolutely. And that, in this quiet moment, is more than enough. There's a rustle in the far corner of your garden, somewhere between the compost heap and the creeping shadow of the hedge where nothing ever seems to grow. You wander over and part the overgrowth, revealing a stubborn cluster of thick gray-green leaves fanning out low to the ground. It looks like a weed, smells like sour spinach. But to the medieval farmer, this was treasure. You've just rediscovered Good King Henry. Yes, that's actually its name. No, it has nothing to do with royalty, unless you count the royal grumbling it inspired in bored children forced to eat it. Despite the noble title, this plant is not glamorous. It's squat, rugged, and prone to popping up in the same places you're trying to dig up potatoes. But for centuries, it was a beloved staple, or at least a tolerable one. You reach down and pluck a few of the arrow-shaped leaves. They're thick, slightly sticky, and covered in a fine dust, like a plant pretending to be velvet. When young, they're edible raw. When older, they require boiling. A lot of boiling, and then seasoning, and then possibly cheese, or a medieval spice blend, or anything to distract you. Still, the people loved it, or at least, they relied on it. Good King Henry, sometimes called poor man's asparagus or Lincolnshire spinach, was one of those rare plants that fed you from root to flower. Leaves in spring, tender shoots in early summer, and seeds by late autumn. It asked for nothing and gave you everything, except flavor. Historians still argue whether its popularity came from genuine taste or sheer desperation. Greens in the medieval diet were mostly seasonal. You didn't have kale in January or lettuce in October. But GKH? It came back, every year, without coaxing. It was the X you didn't want to admit you missed until dinner rolled around. You rinse the leaves in your rain bucket, watching them darken slightly as the dust lifts. There's a faint, metallic scent, earthy and sharp. Not unpleasant, but definitely not the stuff of culinary dreams. In medieval kitchens, cooks usually boiled the leaves, strained them, and mashed them into pottage, with ale and oats if you were lucky, with water and regret if you weren't. The stalks, young and tender, were peeled and treated like asparagus, though they never quite reached that level of refinement. Still, in a stew thickened with barley and flecked with dried herbs, they did the trick. One 15th century recipe book includes a dish called Henricus pie, which combines mashed Good King Henry leaves with stale bread, honey, and goat's cheese. There's no indication if this was considered a treat or a punishment. And yet, this plant was respected. Folk beliefs held that Good King Henry had healing powers. It was used for treating skin rashes, digestive upsets, and melancholy, again with the melancholy. An old Swiss remedy mixed the mashed leaves with goose grease and applied it to chafed parts. Take from that what you will. There's even a whisper in folklore that the plant grew best near homes where kindness reigned. Hence the name, Good King Henry, a plant for the humble, the generous, the quietly strong, though more likely it was named after a semi-mythical ruler who protected farmers from greedy landlords. Either way, it's nice to imagine your garden as a place of quiet nobility. You break off a shoot and bite the end. It's slightly bitter, like spinach that's seen some things. But there's a mineral quality too, a grounding taste, as if the plant remembers the medieval soil it once grew in, back when it was planted near outhouses and footpaths and still somehow thrived. A few herbalists claimed it improved blood choler and balanced the four humors. Others swore it attracted fairies. One record from a Yorkshire village warns that harvesting it on Midsummer's Eve without a whispered blessing could summon spirits of famine. You mutter a half-hearted apology to the hedge, just in case. In the monastic cloisters, Good King Henry was sometimes fed to invalids, mashed into thin broth with a bit of honey and mint. Probably more soothing than satisfying, but everything counts when your other options are boiled turnips and pennants. You toss a few washed leaves into your pan, add some onion and barley, and stir until the mixture turns thick and glistening. The smell is rich and green, like walking through wet grass at dawn. You taste a spoonful and feel something ancient unfold on your tongue. Not flashy, not bright, but real. So why did Good King Henry fade from popularity? Partly because its flavor was never a showstopper, mostly because industrial farming preferred plants that behaved, ones you could ship, slice, and sell. GKH refused to be tamed. It flowered when it pleased. It seeded explosively. It held onto soil like a grudge. Not exactly supermarket material, but here, in the quiet kitchen light, it still has a place. You spoon out a serving, tear some crusty bread, and settle beside the fire. The wind murmurs outside. The soup steams gently, and as you eat, you think of all the people, serfs, monks, mothers, shepherds, who sat beside their own fires centuries ago, warming their hands on bowls of the same humble green. It's a simple connection, but a deep one. The plant might not be royalty, but it has endured, which frankly is more impressive. You wander deeper into the garden, the scent of herbs mixing with the faint earthiness of damp soil and fading summer sun. Your fingers brush against a tall, slender stalk with feathery leaves that remind you vaguely of dill, but something's off. The stalk is thicker, the leaves less delicate, and when you snap one and sniff, there's a peculiar blend of sweetness and sharpness. This is lovage, a medieval giant among herbs that modern kitchens have mostly forgotten. Once a star in gardens across Europe, lovage was the aromatic backbone of soups, stews, and sauces. It was considered the celery of the Middle Ages, but with an attitude, a more robust, assertive flavor that demanded respect. The stalks are hollow, like celery, but with a hint of anise and something woodsy, almost pine-like. You chew a piece cautiously. It's strong, bold, like the medieval equivalent of your friend who shows up uninvited but ends up saving the party. Lovage was beloved for its versatility. You could use the leaves fresh, the stalks chopped in stews, and the seeds as a spice. The roots, when dried and powdered, were said to have medicinal qualities, digestive aid, breath freshener, and general wellness booster. Medieval apothecaries prized it highly, and it often appeared in the Four Thieves vinegar recipes designed to fend off the plague. Historians still argue whether Lovage's medicinal properties were real or simply placebo-bolstered by medieval superstition. Either way, it was a kitchen staple. The plant's popularity was partly thanks to its Roman heritage. Lovage likely arrived in Britain with Roman settlers, much like Alexander's. But it was medieval monasteries that really embraced it, cultivating it carefully and recording its virtues in herbals. Some monks even believed lovage could ward off evil spirits if planted near doorways. A botanical bodyguard, if you will. In cuisine, lovage was often the unsung hero. Medieval cooks didn't just toss it in randomly, they balanced its strength carefully, blending it with milder herbs like parsley and chervil. It gave a gentle bite to broths, a fragrant lift to stews, and sometimes a surprising freshness to sweet dishes. There's a 15th century recipe for love broth that mixes lovage with rosewater and cinnamon, a curious blend that sounds more like a potion than a meal. One quirky fact: lovage seeds were sometimes ground and mixed with honey to create a sweet, spiced treat that doubled as a cough remedy. You can almost imagine medieval kids reluctantly swallowing it, grimacing as they hoped for a quick cure. Modern cooks rediscovering lovage are often surprised by its power. Use too much and it overwhelms. Too little, and it's lost. It's the kind of plant that demands attention, much like the forgotten flavors of the medieval table. You snip a few stalks and toss them into your pot. The aroma instantly brightens, like a medieval wake-up call. You smile and think about all the ways lovage was woven into daily life, medicine, magic, and meals. As evening falls, your stew bubbles quietly, carrying the scent of centuries. Lovage, once a humble herb, returns to remind you that sometimes the boldest flavors are the ones waiting patiently beneath the surface, ready to surprise. You shift your weight as you pass through a patch of sun-dappled greenery, suddenly noticing a plant that looks like a cross between a dandelion and a cactus. Its spiky leaves shoot out in all directions, with a subtle prickliness that reminds you to be careful. This is skirret, a medieval root vegetable that few today would recognize but which was once a prized source of sweet, tender energy. Skirret's thick, creamy roots twist and curl underground like a tangled mess of spaghetti. Peel one, and you'll find a surprisingly sweet, slightly nutty flavor, almost like a cross between parsnip and carrot, with a whisper of licorice. It was one of the few root vegetables that medieval farmers could rely on during the colder months, and it was prized for both its taste and its versatility. You bite into a cooked piece, savoring the mild sweetness that slowly unfolds in your mouth. It's gentle, comforting, and a little nostalgic. Imagine sitting around a fire after a long day of work, sharing bowls of boiled skirret with friends and family. Not glamorous, but nourishing. Skirret is mentioned in medieval cookbooks and herbals from the 14th and 15th centuries, often in lists of garden roots to be preserved through winter. It was so valuable that it even appears in wills, bequeathed alongside land and livestock. The fact that this tangled root could be considered an heirloom tells you just how much it mattered. Historians still debate whether skirret's decline was due to changing tastes or farming practices. It seems likely that as new, easier-to-grow root vegetables, like the potato, entered Europe, skirret slowly lost its place in the common diet. Plus, the roots require a bit of effort to harvest and clean, which doesn't help its case in a fast-paced world. There's an odd bit of folklore attached to skirret, too. Some medieval peasants believed that planting skirret near the home could protect the household from lightning strikes. The theory was that the root's twisting shape somehow grounded dangerous energy. Whether or not that worked, you can help but admire the idea of a humble root doubling as a medieval lightning rod. You drop a few peeled skirret roots into a pot of boiling water, watching the steam rise and the roots turn tender and translucent. A pinch of salt, a drizzle of honey, and suddenly you have a dish that feels both ancient and strangely modern. Sweet, earthy, and just a little magical. It's no wonder skirret found its way into medieval kitchens and stories alike. A vegetable with a twist, quite literally, that reminds you to appreciate the unexpected. You lean in close to a patch of dark, glossy leaves, their jagged edges catching the fading light. They look familiar, but somehow forgotten. This is chervil, the delicate cousin of parsley, with a subtle anise flavor that was cherished in medieval gardens but has since fallen out of everyday use. Chervil's story is one of elegance and gentle refinement. Medieval cooks prized it for its ability to brighten heavy stews and sauces without overpowering the other flavors. It was a herb of choice for noble tables, used to add a whisper of sweetness and complexity. You crush a leaf between your fingers and inhale the soft scent, a mix of mild licorice and fresh grass. It s, like the herb world, s equivalent of a sigh, a breath of springtime in the kitchen. Interestingly, chervil was one of the few herbs allowed in monastic gardens. While monks grew many medicinal plants, chervil was often included in posset recipes. Warm, spiced milk drinks believed to ease digestion and calm nerves. Historians still argue whether chervil THS inclusion was because of actual medicinal properties or simply tradition passed down from Roman herbalists. Medieval texts often refer to chervil as a lady's herb, linking it with beauty and health. Some herbalists recommended it as a hair rinse to lighten locks or as a gentle diuretic. Others believed it could calm the heartsick, which probably explains why it was so popular in both kitchens and apothecaries. There's also a quirky side to chervil. Folklore held that it could protect against witchcraft. Carrying a sprig in your pocket or hanging it in your home was said to ward off curses and bad luck. Considering how much superstition swirled around herbs, it's not surprising. Chervil earned a reputation as a kind of botanical bodyguard. You toss some fresh leaves into your cooking pot, watching them wilt and release their subtle aroma. The effect is gentle but unmistakable, like a medieval whisper carried on the steam. Chervil's decline in popularity is often linked to the rise of more robust herbs like tarragon and basil in Renaissance cuisine, which overshadowed its delicate charm. Yet, even today, some chefs and herbalists are rediscovering its subtle grace and gentle flavor. You think about the many tables, from humble cottages to grand castles, where chervil quietly did its work, lifting meals without drawing attention. A forgotten flavor, yes, but one that reminds you that sometimes the softest notes are the ones that linger longest. You step carefully around a cluster of low, sprawling plants with deeply lobed leaves and tiny, inconspicuous flowers. At first glance, they look like common weeds, but their pungent aroma tells you otherwise. This is skirret's cousin in complexity, Alexander's, a vegetable once a medieval kitchen superstar that somehow slipped through the cracks of time. Alexander's, or Smyrnium olusatrum, if you want to impress someone at a dinner party, was a staple of medieval European gardens for centuries. Its leaves, stems, and roots were all edible, with a flavor somewhere between celery and parsley, but more intense and slightly peppery. You pluck a fresh leaf and chew it cautiously. There's a bright, zesty note that wakes up your taste buds without burning them. Back in the Middle Ages, Alexander's was not just food. It was medicine, spice, and a seasonal treat. The Romans brought it to Britain, and monasteries cultivated it carefully for its supposed health benefits, including aiding digestion and purifying the blood. Historians still argue whether these medical claims were scientifically sound or part of the era, as herbal mysticism, but there's no denying its popularity. Medieval cooks used Alexander's in soups and stews. often mixing it with other herbs to create complex flavor bases. It also appeared in pottages, thick, stew-like concoctions that formed the backbone of many meals. Recipes from the time describe boiling the roots to soften their fibrous texture, then adding the greens for a fresh kick near the end. A quirky fact: sailors believed that Alexander's could prevent scurvy, thanks to its high vitamin C content, although the science behind that was far from medieval understanding. It was a common provision on long voyages, often dried and packed alongside other preserved foods. You can almost imagine medieval farmers harvesting Alexanders at dawn, tired but hopeful, knowing this resilient plant would provide nourishment through the lean months. Yet, despite its resilience and utility, Alexanders gradually faded from common use by the 18th century, replaced by more popular vegetables like celery and spinach. The reasons are murky. Perhaps it was the shifting palates of the wealthy, or the rise of commercial agriculture favoring uniform crops. You toss some fresh Alexander's leaves into your cooking pot, feeling the robust aroma mingle with the other ingredients. The taste is bold, a little wild, reminding you that sometimes the forgotten flavors have stories worth retelling. You sip your stew, imagining the centuries of hands that gathered and cooked this humble, aromatic plant. Like a whisper from the past, Alexander's invites you to savor history, one bite at a time. The sun has dipped low now, and the garden eerie, shadows grow long and cool as you come across a curious patch of slender, tubular pods hanging from a tangled vine. The pods are small and ridged, their muted green color blending into the surrounding foliage. You reach out and gently snap one off. This is lupin bean, a legume long favored by medieval farmers but rarely seen on modern plates. Lupin beans were a medieval staple, prized for their ability to thrive in poor soils and enrich the earth with nitrogen, making them invaluable in crop rotation. They offered a hearty protein source when meat was scarce, although they required careful preparation to remove their bitter alkaloids, a task that likely kept many cooks on their toes. You pop a cooked bean into your mouth, noting its firm texture and mildly nutty flavor, somewhat similar to chickpeas but with a touch more earthiness. The process of soaking and boiling them for hours to make them edible might sound like a chore, but back then, it was just another part of the rhythm of life. Interestingly, lupin beans were not only food but also a medicine. Medieval herbalists used lupin-based poultices to soothe skin ailments, and some believed lupin flower could help with digestive issues. However, historians still argue about the extent to which these treatments were effective or simply rooted in hopeful tradition. Lupin beans' bitter nature gave rise to various folk tales. Some communities believed that eating lupins granted protection from evil spirits or bad luck, especially during harvest festivals. The bitterness was thought to ward off negativity, perhaps a metaphorical detox alongside the physical one. You reflect on the farmers who nurtured these plants, carefully soaking and cooking the beans to feed their families through harsh winters. Lupins were a humble, sometimes inconvenient ally, yet their resilience and nutritional punch earned them a place at many medieval tables. Modern agriculture and culinary trends largely sidelined lupins, but in recent years they've made a comeback among health enthusiasts and vegetarians, appreciated for their protein content and sustainability. You scoop a handful of lupin stew, savoring the depth of flavor and the connection to ancient diets. In the fading light, the lupin bean stands as a reminder that history is often hidden in the overlooked and the underappreciated. What once fed entire communities could easily be lost to time, unless someone stops to remember. The air cools further as you approach a tangled mass of green with bright yellow flowers peeking through the leaves. You reach down and pull up a root, a thick, knobby thing with an oddly twisted shape that almost looks like a gnarled hand. This is skirret's less common cousin, the salsify root, often called the oyster plant for its subtle seafood-like flavor. Salsify was a favorite in medieval Europe, prized for its delicate, slightly sweet taste that reminded some of oysters or artichokes. It was eaten boiled, mashed, or fried, often served as a luxury vegetable in noble households. The root's creamy texture made it versatile, able to substitute for more expensive seafood in inland areas. You slice a piece and taste it. There's a subtle briny note beneath the earthiness, as if the ocean itself has been captured underground. It's comforting and refined, a taste that must have felt exotic in medieval kitchens. The cultivation of salsify required patience. It needed a long growing season and careful soil management, which made it less common among peasant farmers but beloved by gardeners with time and resources. Medieval cookbooks describe recipes where salsify is mixed with herbs, spices, and even sweet elements like honey or raisins to create complex flavor profiles. Interestingly, salsify was also valued for its supposed medicinal properties. It was believed to aid digestion and promote kidney health. Historians still argue whether these benefits were real or part of medieval herbal lore, but it's clear salsify held a respected place in both cuisine and apothecary. Folklore added a whimsical touch. Some tales claimed that salsify plants could predict the weather by changing their growth or flower timing, a kind of natural barometer. Farmers would watch the salsify's blooms, hoping to read the skies and plan their planting accordingly. As you add salsify to your simmering stew, you imagine medieval diners savoring this unique root, marveling at its subtle oceanic whisper. It's a reminder that medieval cuisine was far from bland, layered with surprising flavors that modern palates might easily overlook. You take a slow breath, the stew's aroma wrapping around you like a soft blanket. Salsify, the oyster plant of the earth, returns quietly to claim its place in the story. The garden now rests in the quiet embrace of twilight, shadows soft and colors muted. Near the edge you find a patch of verdant leaves crowned with tiny white flowers, delicate and unassuming. This is Good King Henry, a medieval green that once flourished in kitchen gardens but now lingers mostly in the whispers of history. Good King Henry, also known as Chenopodium bonus henricus, was a hardy perennial that medieval farmers loved for its spinach-like leaves and tender shoots. It grew wild in some regions and was deliberately cultivated in others, providing a reliable source of fresh greens long before modern vegetables took over. You pick a tender leaf and taste it raw, fresh, slightly grassy with a mild bitterness that is pleasantly earthy. Cooked, it softens and sweetens, perfect for soups, pies, or simply boiled and buttered. What as fascinating is that Good King Henry was often called the poor man S. asparagus because of its shoots, which some people cooked and ate much like asparagus spears. In an age when access to fresh vegetables was limited by season and geography, this plant was a small but steady treasure. Medieval herbals praised it not only for its culinary value but also for its medicinal uses. It was believed to soothe wounds, aid digestion, and even improve eyesight. Historians still argue about the validity of these claims, but Good King Henry's persistence in folk medicine suggests it held a place of trust. An odd medieval custom involved the plant. Some thought carrying a leaf of Good King Henry could bring good luck or protection, especially during travels. It might not be much help against marauding bandits, but in a world full of uncertainty, every little charm counted. You add a handful of chopped leaves to your stew, watching them wilt gently in the heat. The flavor is subtle, almost a final punctuation mark to the rich tapestry of tastes you've gathered. As the night deepens, you realize that this plant, like so many others you've met tonight, carries with it the quiet stories of survival, adaptation, and forgotten traditions. Each bite is a connection, a thread tying you to those who lived centuries ago, who depended on these humble greens to nourish body and soul. Good King Henry may not reign in modern kitchens, but in the kingdom of medieval flavors, it holds a steady, loyal throne. Now, as promised, the gentle wind down. The night settles around you like a soft blanket, the faint rustle of leaves and distant chirps a lullaby from another time. You've wandered through gardens forgotten by centuries, tasted roots and herbs that once shaped lives and stories. There's comfort in this, knowing that even in the past's dust and silence, life thrived in simple, surprising ways. These vegetables, once lost to time, remind you that history isn't just dates and battles, but the quiet, steady pulse of everyday moments. So, as you close your eyes tonight, let the memory of these flavors and stories drift gently, a peaceful echo from the past. Sleep well and dream of gardens where forgotten vegetables bloom again.